I wanted you to explain how our debt management is even setting us back. Now, a very layman interpretation, which I would like to give, is that our debt is not in naira, our debt is in dollars. And here, economically, we're seeing ourselves struggling to earn dollars in order to support the economy. And so one imagines, given that our debt is in dollars, we have to earn dollars to pay our debts. How much of a difficulty are we in? And this odious debt, this, I think Africa certainly has been saddled with odious debts. Well, I guess they have needed it, it would appear, but one must honestly admit to the fact that these debts is appears to be a form of chain around the neck of Africa, holding it back from being, from being flexible enough to pursue her economic ambitions. So, what would you say about this?
Well, I think Africa and Nigeria are in different situations. I think there's African countries who have these odious debts, and I mean, there's a number of lenders that have been involved in it. But I do have to point the finger a little bit at the Chinese who lent money for infrastructure. As I said earlier in the show, often the infrastructure program doesn't work out. The Chinese built the infrastructure, so there was no input to the local economy. There wasn't even input into what the infrastructure was. It was between the government and China and the government of China. And then it doesn't produce a return, but the government or the people still have the debt, and that's a problem. The difference in Nigeria is we have immense assets. I mean, the amount of debt, again, I'm a little out of date because I've retired, but the number I have in my mind, in the US dollar debt in Nigeria, the number I have for the federal government, maybe 15 or $20 billion. That is a very small amount versus the economy, but it's a very, even tinier amount compared to the immense assets. I mean, Nigeria is one of the world's biggest reserves of gas, for example. And there was again, you go to these policies that make sense in theory but are not executed. I mean, it was under His Excellency President Buhari said we're not really an oil economy, we're a gas economy. Well, of course, PwC said our biggest export is people, but gas is a very valuable thing to export. And yet even though there was this crisis with the Russia-Ukraine war and Europe is desperate for gas, and I said, as many people did 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when COVID happened, and then when the invasion of Ukraine happened, I guess over 2 years, getting on to 2 years now, there should be this massive pivot to gas. We haven't seen it. So again, we don't use the assets that we have. And then in terms of the debt, I mean, the government has refused to make any steps to show the people it can use its resources wisely. I go back to, the Orange Shea report was published in 2013. I was very happy when that was published. Nothing was done about it for a long time. Eventually, His Excellency President Buhari said it would be implemented. He said that in
Pardon
April
me,
2020.
what report? Pardon me, the name of the report.
Orange Shea. So in the restructuring, simplification of the government, the reduction in the number of agencies. I mean, people are aware there's more than 1,000 MDAs in the federal government. And they weren't created to serve the Nigerian people. They were served effectively as a system of patronage to share out the cake. Well, the problem is there is no cake. It was a cake economy. It was a cupcake economy. Then it became a cookie economy, and now it's a crumb economy. So there's nothing to share, and yet we still have all this number of MDAs. So Orange Shea report came out and said that as far back as 2013. And of course, it's worse than not. There's no cake to share. By having all these multiple agencies with overlapping responsibilities, it reduces investment. It reduces business activity because there's confusion. People have multiple regulators. They sometimes give contradictory things. They're not sure what to do. It creates that uncertainty. You are asking why investors don't come. Well, one reason they don't come is this incredible uncertainty. So someone looks in their office in Berlin, and they say, oh, immense market in Nigeria. Maybe we can even manufacture there. They start to have the German government is an ally with Nigeria. There's been an EU conference. Let me go have a look. And then when they get on the ground and they find out they have to deal with 6, 7, 8 agencies, they just say, this is too complex and too risky for us. And of course, Pebek, Dr. Jamoke over at Pebek is a national heroine, and she's tried very hard to make the ease of doing business improve in the country. But unless there's structural change, it's hard to make enough progress. And that is the thing that really I don't understand about this new government. You go back to what I said a little bit earlier. We face this debt issue, we face this overspending, and yet there's the creation of 2 new agencies announced in the Ministry of Culture. Now, where are those funds going to come from? The government needs to borrow those funds. And yet, so you in effect have this perpetuation of people who benefit from government largesse, which are not largely, are the elites. And you have the Nigerian people who continue to suffer. So until we fundamentally address that issue, I don't think we're going to make much progress. But, you go back to the debt level. I mean, obviously we have lots of oil and we're not producing enough. We have even more gas. We stated it was a policy to do the gas. We have 7 trains running. We seem to not be able to increase the gas production, despite the fact that Russia invading Europe gave us this immense economic opportunity on that. So it makes you, weep. I mean, we wrote the paper, as I said, about dead assets in Nigeria. We continue to have all these dead assets and don't seem to be making any progress. And the government has not, as I will repeat again, the government has not demonstrated to the Nigerian people it can use Nigerian resources wisely.
Well, so talking about using Nigerian resources, now this is in form of crude. Now, the Export-Import Bank, Afrexim Bank, it was reported that they had successfully arranged a syndicated $3.3 billion crude repayment facility sponsored by the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited, NNPCL. We hear that an initial disbursement of $2.25 billion have been made. One would think that, well, this $2.2 billion is supposed to help bolster the economy to some degree. But in layman terms, can you explain this crude oil repayment facility? Can you?
Right. So
yeah.
So I mean, the fact that this facility exists is just a symptom of the problem that I just said. So what's going on here is Afrexim Bank, which is fantastic institution, was my client. Dr. Orama is an African hero. They've done so many amazing things. They're incredibly well run, very professional. So, they've come along and they said, okay, Nigeria, you produce crude oil. We're going to lend you money now because you'll produce crude oil in the future. So they get this first tranche of about, as you said, I think $2 billion. And of course, the Central Bank of Nigeria, it helps them because they still have this backlog. So they have the $7 billion backlog of foreign exchange. I think they paid $2.5 billion. Then about $2.5 billion is they turned out was not legitimate. So they still have $2 to $3 billion left to pay. So they get this $2 billion and they can make further inroads on that. But again, the reason this facility exists is because we're not producing enough oil. If we were producing enough oil, we would just sell the oil and have dollars in hand right now. Instead, what's happening is the Afrexim Bank said, well, you'll sell oil in the future. So we'll give you this money now and you pay interest until you sell the oil. So again, it comes back to the oil at 1.3 million barrels a day. The oil production is too low. So I mean, credit to the Afrexim Bank. It will probably help manage the FX situation in the short run, but it doesn't address the fundamental issue, which is we need oil production at 1.7, 1.9, 2.2 to really turn the economy around.
Well, the main aim of the unification is to close the gap between the parallel market and the official market rates. So you look at the Naira and the way it's fallen, and according to PwC, they're saying that the Naira's lost its value 98%. What is the hope? Is there something the Nigerian government has to be doing now? Because we even hear that whatever the government does now would only begin to reap the fruits, say, about 2 years from now. But one wonders whether there's even anything going on now that can guarantee some kind of economic stability 2 years from now. In the absence of something tangible going on now, I guess this whole plight, the pain will continue and Nigerians will continue to wail. In your economic perspective, how and what would you advise the Nigerian government to be doing right now?
Well, I'll repeat what I've said in the show, and I have said it consistently since the election last year: get oil production up. There's no other short-term solution. I mean, 100% of the government's efforts should be devoted to this. I don't think we've seen any, as I said, no changes in NPC, no explanation of why oil production is not going up. They said it was something they would focus on, and yet we haven't seen any progress. And I'm not sure who's being held accountable for it on that. But that is the solution to it. I mean, when you say the government fixed the problem, I mean, we have a large open economy. We have an incredibly large diaspora. There are things that we need that we can't produce ourselves. I mean, for example, I talk about all this remote work, but all that remote work, which earns dollars for the country. So companies like Outsource Global, run by another national hero in Amal Hassan, earns dollars for the country. But to produce those dollars, they need to buy some things in dollars. They need to buy computers, obviously, other devices for their people. They also need bandwidth. And of course, the bandwidth, you may pay in Naira, but it's ultimately determined by the dollar rate because, of course, all the telecoms equipment to allow that bandwidth, it has to be paid for in dollars. So, we need some things in dollars. We're not going to produce them in the short term. Our best source of dollars are hydrocarbons, and we aren't focused on it. So I don't see any other solution other than getting the oil production back up in the next 1 to 2 years. In the longer term, say 5 years, but it's a long time to wait given the suffering of the Nigerian people. If we do have those 1 million remote workers who are earning dollars for the nation, it's really going to help immensely. It will balance the economy. That takes more time than hydrocarbons. I mean, when I arrived in the country, back in 2008, the oil production was 2.2 million barrels a day. It didn't seem any problem. I think people were thinking it would go up to 2.5 million barrels a day. How is it possible from 2008 to 2024 that we've gone from 2.2 million barrels a day to 1.3 million barrels a day?
Yeah, very, very good question. Now, this is a final question, and this is just out of concern for where the world is going and how Nigeria could be going in that direction, and that's climate change. So we know that the world is, on this transition from fossils to green energy. And here you are advising that for now, in the immediate, one way we can get the economy up is to drill for more oil. What does this say about Nigeria's capacity to, maybe naturally is the word, to naturally transition and maybe efficiently transition from her current power sources to a green economy? And is it even possible, given that we're still struggling with poverty?
Well, I mean, I was one of the first people in Nigeria to talk about climate change. I used to talk, I created PwC's global megatrends program back in 2010. I moved full-time. It's coming to Nigeria, but moved full-time in 2012, was talking about climate change 2012. I mean, it's a complete and utter catastrophe. But I think there's lots of good news around the world. I mean, for example, the United States renewables are growing very fast. Nuclear, which I'm a fan of, is coming back. So, I think we're going to get there on that. And of course, the population in the world is not going to grow from where it is today. In fact, the number of children in the world is actually going down. So I think that's all good news for the planet. But, as Nigeria and Africa, we're going to suffer a lot from climate change. We're going to have to figure out resiliency strategies. But on the hydrocarbons, I don't think in 15 to 20 years we're going to use much oil. I think oil is essentially peaked. But in the short term, and from a justice and equity viewpoint, I mean, other people should be cutting back. If we could produce, we're not even near our quota. Our quota is 1.8 million barrels a day today. To produce 2.2, we'd have to get more of a quota. Others would have to cut back. I mean, you're going to have to expect Saudi Arabia to cut back, UAE to cut back on their oil and give some room to African producers to make some money before we stop running out of, we stop using oil. But in a longer term, 15, 20 years, we absolutely have to expect that we're not going to be producing much oil at that point. Maybe we produce gas because it's a somewhat cleaner fuel, but utter catastrophe for the planet. We're already seeing the devastation in many parts of the world. One of the things I love to do is ski. It's just, obviously it's not saying it's life and death, but ski resorts are closing because there's a lack of snow. So, but we will make that transition as a planet. I have a lot of faith in young people, but obviously in Africa, there has to be particular attention to make this transition. But we need to make some money in Nigeria in the short term to really give us the chance to take off in some of these other industries.